Okay. And I think, Lauren, we should get going now. I just want to remind you that you are on mute. So thank you. Okay, to see you, Lauren, and Jesse as well. So I think, Lauren, we should get going now. I just want to remind you that you are on mute. So thank you. Okay, to see you, Lauren, and Jesse as well. So I think, Lauren, we should get going now. I just want to remind you that you are
And
mute.
the audio is playing back to me.
Yeah, I noticed that. So
Okay.
we're not doing YouTube.
All right.
I tried. All right. So welcome everybody. You are here today to learn just how awesome known egg donation is. We've got a really good presentation for you. I want to introduce you, I guess, to the next slide, please, Jesse. Introduce you to my cohort here, my colleague in crime, Lauren Makler, who's the co-founder and CEO of Co-Fertility. Co-Fertility is an egg donation agency. I'll certainly let Lauren tell you more about them, but I can tell you they're one of our trusted family building partners, and we're delighted to work with them and really excited to take time today to talk about, I think everyone knows, they've heard about known egg donation and how it can work and what can be so great about it, but we really want to give you do a deep dive and go into details, so what your options are, and then Lauren will take you through all that, and then I'm going to actually share my personal experience with known egg donation in just a few minutes as well. So without further ado, and by the way, anyone, we are taking questions. As soon as you have your questions, please ask them. You can use either the chat or the Q&A function. I'll be looking at both. We will not get to your questions until the end, but I promise we've left plenty of time to respond to your questions at the end. I just don't want you to forget the question that you had. So I want you to ask it right away and we will certainly come back to it. All right. Thank you once again. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Lauren and ask you to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you all for being here. I know it's a lot to interrupt your Thursday to join something like this. And so just wanted to say thank you to those who are attending. Jesse and I are so excited to be here. Co-Fertility, just to give a little bit of context, we definitely are an egg donation platform, but we are a bit different than your average egg donation agency. So I just want to quickly highlight the how, and then we can totally jump into this topic. The major difference with what we do is we actually don't do cash compensation for egg donation. So when a donor works with Co-Fertility, instead of getting cash compensation, she's actually keeping half of the eggs retrieved for her own future use. So we call this egg sharing. It means that if down the line she experiences infertility or needs, frozen eggs, she will have those because she has gone through that process with an intended parent. And so it's our way of saying, you know what, let's take cash compensation out of this. And it really brings more women to the platform who otherwise would have loved, to help create another family or grow another family, but, maybe wasn't interested in egg donation with the cash compensation piece. We find that it can be a turnoff to many women who otherwise would do it. So that's the biggest difference with Co-Fertility. We can talk more about that if you have questions, but just to jump into the topic for today, I just want to do a quick level set of what is the egg donation process. Before you get going and choose a donor, she has already been pre-screened. And your first step as an intended dad is to choose the donor that you want to work with. It's typically someone who's between the ages of 21 and 34. And you can choose based on a number of factors. We'll talk more about what those things and what questions you might want to ask yourself as you're choosing an egg donor. But once you do choose who you're going with, she then will go into the clinic for additional screening. This is both to make sure she is physically and mentally prepared for the donation process. Once she's cleared, there's a legal agreement that we'll also talk a little bit about. And after that's signed, the egg retrieval gets scheduled. She will then go through a 10 to 14 day process of giving herself injections and being monitored by the clinic to then retrieve her eggs. At that point, those eggs are fertilized with sperm to create embryos. And once deemed that those embryos are healthy and good to move forward with, those eggs are transferred, typically 1 or 2 at a time, to a separate gestational carrier's uterus. So the woman who does the carrying is different than the woman who has the egg retrieval. You want to go to the next slide? Awesome. So when you're in that early matching phase, a lot of intended dads will ask themselves, what are the traits that we want in a donor? Do we have physical characteristics in mind? Do we have different heritage or ethnicity, in mind? Or, we actually hear this a lot, that they want someone who has specific traits or hobbies specifically, or professional goals. Maybe you both work in STEM and you're looking for a donor who also works in STEM, or you want someone who's really athletic because you're really athletic. And so it'd be nice to see that come through in a future child's traits. And while these qualities definitely can contribute from, genetics, I think there's so much that we can't discount what happens through nurture as well. But really, one question that we really encourage the intended dads that we work with to think about early on in that process, besides just the characteristics of the donor, are what type of relationship do you want to have with the donor? And what type of relationship do you want your future child to have with the donor? And so the reason we say you should think about that at the start is because a donor is often, at least with co-fertility, giving her preferences about the relationship she wants to have with the recipients upfront. And so it would be unfortunate if you get your heart totally set on a donor and you feel like she's like exactly who you want to work with, and then you look and it turns out that she had a different disclosure preference or a different relationship preference than you had. And so we encourage you to sort of think about that before you even match, so that you don't have like mismatched preferences. If you want to go to the next slide, I can talk about the difference between those different relationships. At co-fertility, we call them disclosed and undisclosed, but I just want to call out that other organizations have different names for this. Your clinic might have different names for this. And so disclosed is also known as known donation, where the identity and name and contact information is shared between the intended dads and the donor. Alternatively, there is an undisclosed or de-identified relationship where that contact information or name is not shared. And I want to be clear, and this is something that unfortunately isn't happening enough in this space. The word anonymous is just not one that we should be using anymore. And I actually say, like, I'm allergic to the word anonymous because it's really not possible, right? Like, if you think about it, 23andMe or Ancestry.com, these kits exist, right? You can go buy one at CVS. If you have a credit card or, $20, right? You can buy one of those tests. And even if your donor never takes one of those tests, if her great uncle took one of those tests, she would be possible to find someday, right? And so we are really clear about that with, the recipient parents as well as the donor, to say, like, look, anonymity in egg donation just does not exist. And so let's know that up front. I think we believe that there's really a spectrum between disclosed and undisclosed outside of sharing contact information, right? I think that's the binary thing. Do you want contact information and name or not? And then if you choose disclosed or you choose something that's known, there's a spectrum of the type of communication preferences or the relationship that you can have with the donor. And this is something that can really be worked out in the legal process that you have with the donor. And so when you do enter into this type of relationship, you have a third-party reproduction attorney who is well-versed in the subject and will be very able to help you determine, like, what is it that we want with this donor, right? Do we want a holiday card? Do we want to send a holiday card once a year or email once a year? Or do we want the opportunity when this child is older to, have a in-person meeting or a Zoom call, right? Like, what do we want that to look like? I'll also mention that if you do choose undisclosed, there is possibility for communication. However, it would go through a third party. So it would either go through the attorney who's overseeing the match, or the agency that you work with, or an organization or system like donor sibling registry. So you're able to sort of keep contact information out of it, but there could be communication there. And then, so at Co-Fertility, we really do encourage known donation. And I think while the fertility industry has in the past sort of relied on secrecy and not sharing that information, there's so much research now that shows the benefits of being open with children about their donor conceived roots and sharing any available information and characteristics about the donor with them. I think, you know, the fact that they are donor conceived will definitely be a part of their child identity. And so knowing that research shows that having that understanding from an early age can have really long lasting positive impacts. We, as an organization, worked with a nonprofit called the U.S. Donor Conceived Council. This is an organization that is made up of all donor conceived people who advocate for the rights of future donor conceived people. And they feel very strongly that disclosed donation is the best for the donor conceived person. It is something that really gives your future child the opportunity to have as much information available to them as possible to the degree that they want it, right? It's the least limiting option for them. It also gives you an open line of communication if anything came up related to the donor's medical history or to the child's medical history. And it just gives that opportunity to connect if they want it. It also, I think, and this is something that we've heard quite a bit, is that if your child does reach out down the line, it's a lot less likely that they would face rejection from the donor than if you were to enter into an undisclosed relationship, or what some organizations call anonymous, right? I think because the donor knows they're giving their information, they're much more open-minded to being contacted down the road. And I think the other thing I would mention too is that, and maybe this is something Brian will attest to in a few minutes, is that to have, you know, this opportunity to connect with the, you know, someone who's a genetic relative doesn't take away from the relationship that a parent and child have with one another, right? We work with an attorney who often says love is not like a pie, right? It's not like, you know, you're taking away anything, right? There is just more room for more people. And so I think we often hear that as a parent, you can never have too many people who care about your child. And so adding one other person doesn't take away from anything else.
Not at all. Thank you so much, Lauren. I was going to say the same thing. That's my big line, is we cannot have enough people, stable, loving, wonderful people in our children's lives who love them, as far as I'm concerned. All right, thank you so much for going through that. And I promise to share my own firsthand experience with this. So, little background, my now husband, Ferd, and I met Lauren, not this Lauren, our egg donor Lauren, back in the fall of 2009 at the IVF clinic for her testing. We had our baby boy, Levi, with us. He was our firstborn child, and he came to us through closed adoption, which meant that we never got to meet anyone from his birth family. His birth family never got to meet us. Actually, they just had the adoption agency find a family that our agency thought would be loving and stable, etc. So we first met Lauren online via her profile, and then we connected with her phone. But this was our first time meeting her in person. And while we obviously liked her profile, enjoyed our conversation with her, we wouldn't be meeting now at the clinic. And so here we were, we sat down next to her in the waiting room. And I remember she reached over with outstretched arms, her way of asking to hold Levi. I saw her gingerly take Levi from me, and she held him close to her body, with her head ensuring his head rested safely and snugly onto her chest. Somehow, in those first few moments, I think my husband and I felt instantly and madly in love with her. Now we just needed to make sure that she was willing to be a known egg donor. As I explained, we already had one child who wouldn't be able to meet his birth family, who wouldn't have all these questions that he has answered. And we certainly didn't want any new child, a new sibling of Levi's, to have so many unknowns about their origin as well. So we were very excited when Lauren told us, while she was holding Levi, that sure, of course, she'd be open to meeting any baby or babies that came out of our surrogacy journey together. Well, as it turns out, with Lauren's help, we did give Levi a sibling. In fact, we gave him two. We gave him twin girls, twin sisters, Ella and Sadie. Now, to put this into perspective, this was all a long time ago. Today, Levi is 14 years old. He's as big as me. Sadie and Ella turned 13 in October. Now, since each of our kids were born, we had a story that we shared each night. In fact, my husband wrote a blog post. It's on Gays with Kids. We talked first with the Levi, how we created our family and how we came to be in our family. Then with the girls, in appropriate language, the same thing, how we grew our family with the arrival of Ella and Sadie. And thanks very much to the help of our egg donor, Lauren. So the girls have known about Lauren as an egg donor their entire lives, but always, of course, in age-appropriate language, etc. Well, I told you they're about to be 13. In the last year and a half, we noticed that they had more and more questions about their egg donor. So Sadie is very athletic. Neither my husband nor I could throw a ball, catch a ball, run in a straight line if we had to, etc. And I always said to Sadie, oh, that's from Lauren. You get your athleticism from Lauren. Ella is very, very creative. She loves to draw, she loves theater, etc. Now, I will say that her dads are big theater queens. We love going to musicals, but we can't do anything. I can't, like, you will not want to hear me sing. I can't hold the note, etc. So we always told Ella, oh, that's what you get from Lauren, our egg donor, your egg donor. So more and more questions would come up. And finally, they said they would like to meet Lauren. Well, we had been in touch with Lauren. So back then, there were no contracts. There was no like official formal agreements to say, yes, she would be in touch with us. It was just what we promised each other. So we would send, we connected on LinkedIn and then on Facebook. So we'd be sort of in touch, but not really. Well, about 5 months ago, I reached out to Lauren and I asked her how she was doing. And then I asked her if she would be willing to do a video call with our kids. The one thing I knew is that she had moved from Massachusetts to California. And she's like, of course I would. I told you back then. So I was very excited. I think I started crying then as I am now. We scheduled a video call with our girls, with Lauren, for a week later. And it was about 4 days before the girls were to go off to overnight camp. So this is a very important call. I made sure that both Ella and Sadie came to the call with a host of questions that they wanted to ask. Of course, Ferd and I had our own. As it turned out, Lauren had several as well. We got on that call and she just took over, and instantly we fell in love with her again. And we reminded Ferd and I of, what drew us to her in the first place. She was so great. She answered all of the girls' questions. As it turned out, I had been lying to our daughters when I said that all the athleticism and other stuff came from Lauren. Lauren doesn't have an athletic bone in her body either. It turns out her sister, however, is extremely athletic. So Sadie actually inherited not my genes, not Lauren's genes, Lauren's sister's genes. And that was also an important thing that I needed to know, because I've been on webinars like this before, and I've been with IVF docs, and they always say, you can have certain traits that you really want to make sure you're going to pass on, but there's no way to know what's going to happen. And so I'm telling you right now, Sadie is an athlete, and it's got nothing to do with me or my family. And it's got nothing to do with our egg donor. It's our egg donor sister, who turns out is the athlete in her family. At any rate, the call went really, really well. Lauren afterwards sent us a whole bunch of pictures where we could see, sure enough, Sadie even looks like her sister. Did when she was Sadie's age. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Lauren has said she is open to getting in touch with the girls as often as they want or need to. I'm supposed to go to California on a business trip in November. She's already asked me to make sure that I let her know and that we're hoping to get together. She turns out she's married, but does not have any children. So she was so excited to meet Ella and Sadie. And none of this would have happened if we had not really pushed for known egg donation. So I can't possibly encourage it strongly enough. I know there are some instances in which it's just not going to happen. In fact, that was going to be one of my first questions to you, Lauren, is to talk about what can folks do if, if it just can't happen, etc. But for those who can, if at all possible, I cannot possibly encourage known egg donation strongly enough, because it has been absolutely wonderful in my family's experience.
Wow, I'm emotional now, Brian. I wasn't expecting to start my morning this way, but that's beautiful, and I love that so much. And it's really very consistent with a lot of the stories I also hear from other people who decided to go into a known donation. I actually recently heard a story about a donor being invited to, she affectionately calls the donor conceived child her egg. She has now gone on to have 3 children of her own, but when her egg turned 13, he asked his parents if the donor could be invited to his bar mitzvah. And she went with all 3 of her kids and her parents to her egg's bar mitzvah. And during his speech, he thanked her for the gift that she gave his parents. And I just they don't have this ongoing relationship. They exchange emails once a year, and it just meant a lot to him to meet them in person and to have them at such a momentous occasion in his life.
That's a wonderful story. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw a question come. Oh, we can just quickly, if you want to go to the next slide, Jesse. I just want to share that, at Co-Fertility, when we do have a disclosed donation or a known donation, we start with what we call a mutual match, meaning that the donor has to also opt in to the same preferences that the intended dads want, meaning that, they have the opportunity to, see a little bit more about them and learn and decide if it's the right fit for them, which we think does set up a known and disclosed donation for long-term success. The next piece is that we actually give the opportunity for a match meeting. And this is something that can happen over Zoom. We've actually had these happen in person as well, but it can sort of just reaffirm, kind of like your experience, Brian, that yes, we met her and this is the person we want to do this with. It also gives that feeling to the donor as well. When she meets the person who wants to use her eggs, right? We find that she gets way more invested and really excited about the match, right? We've seen scenarios where someone's I was 50% in this to help someone else and 50% in it for me. But when I met them, it was 95% for them and 5% for me, which is really nice, right? So we highly encourage the match meeting as well. I know it can be nerve-wracking, but I really think it goes a long way. And then the last piece is that we see this as much more than you just getting eggs, right? So when we work with someone, you have our ongoing support from the day we meet you till whenever you want it, right? So we'd love to be there throughout this journey and provide support all the way through as you raise this donor conceived child. So I'd love to jump to questions just so that we can get these answered quickly. I see, can geographical location be a characteristic up front? And I think actually Brian's example is really important, right? The donor actually lived in Massachusetts where Brian lived at time of retrieval, but now she lives in California. And so even if you did pick someone who lived local to you in this thought that you would have in-person interactions, it's hard to make that a sure thing. And so, we're happy to share location of our donors once we've met an intended dad. We don't have that in their profile up front just for privacy reasons, but I would just be cautious about that because you can't sort of guarantee that someone is going to stay where they're based. I see a question about co-parenting. I don't think that that's so common. I think that, and maybe, yeah, Brian, I think you're agreeing. I think that in the agreement that you have with the donor, it's pretty explicit that anything having to do with raising this child, having custody of this child, and having, you know, the responsibility of parenting really does fall on the intended dad and recipient. And so it's not necessarily something that we've seen, nor would we really encourage.
No, co-parenting, if at all, and we certainly have seen lots of, you know, we do know lots of gay dads who co-parent either with gay women or straight women, but that happens sort of outside of this. And that's, you know, this is not a matching. In fact, the only matching agency I know, there used to actually be a matching agency for men looking to find a co-parent, but that agency, you know, closed its doors probably 5 or 6 years ago. So Lauren, what about my question about if you met someone and they're not open to completely known? Are there ways to, you know, suggest maybe that they'll be more willing to have some flexibility, or how would you suggest?
Yeah, so we purposely ask donors up front if they want a disclosed relationship, and they either tell us they want disclosed, they want undisclosed, or they're open to either. And I'll tell you, it's close to 90% of our donors who are open to disclosed. So that's a good thing. For those who are specifically saying they want undisclosed, we really don't like to push them to change their mind, because you really want to be setting everybody up here for long-term success. And so we think honoring their preferences and not pushing anyone to change that is really important. However, for those who say either, they're usually really inclined to honor the preferences of the intended dad, right? And so we find that when we learn what the intended dad wants, and that's what happens right after you place a match with us, a member advocate from our team meets with you to learn about all of your preferences. We then have a similar conversation with the donor to ask if she's in alignment with those preferences. And so if not, we suggest that you work with a different donor and we'll rematch you at no additional fee, or we'll refund your fee if you can't find someone that you feel as strongly about. But we don't encourage you to sort of push them, right? Because again, it's you want to do what feels right from the start. There is one alternative, and it's called Open ID, and it's something we've seen a few folks do, which means that contact information is not shared up front. Maybe you don't even have a match meeting, but at the time your child turns 18, they do have the option to get the contact information from their lawyer. We don't see this happening too frequently. I think when people discuss that, they're sort of like, well, why not just share the information now? But I did just want to mention that option exists.
So sort of like with adoptions, when Levi turns 18, he will have the ability to reach out to our adoption agency to his.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. It looks like we answered. Sorry, I just want to make sure there were no other questions. No. Okay. This has been great, Lauren. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all this information. Thank you also, Jesse. Appreciate all your support and help here. Thanks to everybody who's watching. If you still have other questions, do not worry. You can,
we did
you
get
actually, guys, you have a question.
Yes. So in the way that our fees work, the way the cost works, there's 3 buckets of fees. The first is what's called the co-fertility coordination fee. That's $7,000. And it covers the cost of us finding the donor, of us really shepherding this process from end to end. It comes with what we call a baby guarantee, meaning that if anything happens that's outside of your control in this process, we will either rematch you with another donor or we will refund you. Like, we want you to have a baby, and it's important to us that we make you whole there. The next bucket of fees is what we call administrative expenses. This typically runs around $5,700, is inclusive of your attorney, the donor's attorney, IVF complication insurance, escrow management fee, as well as storage for the donor's half of the eggs for 10 years. It's a one-time storage fee. And then the third bucket of fees is the clinical expenses. And so this is the cost that you pay to the clinic to do donor screening, the donor egg retrieval, as well as donor medication. That cost varies depending on which clinic that you work with. But then that's, I think what you're seeing there is like us estimating what that cost is. If you have further questions, we can send you a cost sheet, or we can have a one-on-one consultation with you to walk you through any of that.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
that. And that's I'm going to just add, that's called extreme transparency, which is not always what you'll find within the surrogacy and IVF journey. So it's really important to work with agencies and organizations that offer this extreme transparency, because there's nothing worse than getting hit with fees that you didn't know about. So she's actually sharing fees that are a result of, that are involved in the egg donor, but have nothing to do with their organization, their agency. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all. Again, if you have any questions, you can send an email to dads@gayswithkids.com or support@cofertility.com. Richard, sorry, well, all right, Richard wants to know about foundations that help offset some of these costs. Lauren, do you actually want to respond to that, or?
We have different resources on our website that for different organizations that have grants and things like that. I imagine you do too, right?
Yeah, and Richard, I'm sure we've shared those with you before, but I'm happy to reshare them with you to make sure that you got them. Okay,
Great.
cool. All right, without further ado, now we're past our deadline date. So deadline time. So I need to end this. Lauren, thank you so much. It's been great collaborating with you and Jesse, and I appreciate all that you guys do, and I appreciate your authenticity and passion for helping to support gay men on their journeys on our journeys to becoming dads. To those of you who are watching, thank you so much for joining us. If you want more information about GWK Academy or about Cofertility, you can get all that on GWK Academy. Just download our app wherever you like to download your apps. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. This was fun.